Hey, what's going on, guys? Just came in on live to answer any questions that you have, whether it's related to the boot camp or anything else. I haven't done one of these live Q&As in a few days, so I figured I would jump on now. So feel free to ask away. Yeah, I think it's been, what, 3 or 4 days since I did a live Q&A? Might as well do one now, huh? I had a really good call with Matt over at Just Django. He interviewed me. I had a really good time. Really looking forward to that podcast coming out hopefully sometime next week, and we will talk about it then, and I'll let everyone know. But again, I'm here answering your questions, so let me know what questions you have, because that's why I'm here. Santosh, how's it going? Welcome. Hello. And Ankit, hello, good morning. What time is it where you're from, Ankit? And where are you from? Let me know. Hello, hello, welcome, welcome, hi. Django admin panel customization. Are you asking about how that's done, or are you suggesting something I should do in the future? Good morning. What time is it where you're at? So it sounds like some of you are in India and it's morning time, which is not surprising because it's nighttime here. You know what I mean? Can I suggest a good resource to learn Celery? Yeah, I have one. It's called Time and Tasks. I'm working on Time and Tasks 2, but I also have a few blog posts that show you how to set it up in Django. So I'm assuming that you'd be using Celery with Django. You can absolutely use it in Python projects otherwise, but I have a whole series on it dedicated to Celery. The older one is still definitely relevant to today. It's changed very little since then. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it. All right. From Indonesia, Andrea, thank you for coming out. Tech Realms, good morning. Hey, what's up? How can we create a one-time URL pattern that changes every time a user visits the page? I tried ran_int, but it seems like urls.py runs only once. Yeah, so the URL itself is not what will potentially change, right? So what you actually want to have is a wildcard URL. So using either path or repath, if you're using a newer version of Django. If you're using an older version of Django, essentially you want to use a regular expression that will capture some sort of string that your random integer or your random number would actually associate to that, right? So if you have 4 digits long, then you would want a URL that matches those 4 digits. And then on the view, that's actually where you'd handle that random logic, whatever that random page is, your view would actually be doing that. And if you're talking about actually having actual different URLs, well, you can generate what that URL is going to be, have that generation be random, but the view that actually handles that random generated URL would handle that random integer. If that makes sense, hopefully it does. But basically, you want to do this in the view, not in the actual URL pattern itself. Because URL patterns are pretty much just universal, right? So what is the pattern that should be matched, and send it to the view that's going to handle whatever logic is going in there. Thanks for the question. You having a hard time customizing the Django admin panel? One of the biggest questions I have for you is, why are you spending a lot of time customizing the Django admin? I do think that there's definitely value there, but if you're spending too much time trying to customize the Django admin, you might as well make your own custom views so that you can build all of the logic you need, and that can be limited to only super users or staff users, much like the admin is. You would just go that way. That's actually what I recommend that you do, is go that direction versus trying to spend too much time customizing the Django admin. Thanks for the question. In Bangladesh, it's 9:30 a.m. Nice. Yeah, it's 8:30 p.m. here in California. So yeah, good to have you here. Can we do machine learning with only Django? Probably not, because Django itself is not a machine learning library. So at the very least, you'd probably need something like NumPy, which is numerical Python. You can do machine learning with just NumPy. You can do machine learning with scikit-learn. Of course, Keras, PyTorch, TensorFlow, FastAI. There's a lot of other machine learning type packages out there, but doing it only with Django, as far as I know, I mean, you could probably write it in pure Python. Let me just say that. So you probably could write it with pure Python. So then your answer is yes. But you're creating a lot of work for yourself just by limiting it to Django. So Django is not really made for machine learning. It's made for web application development. Thanks for the question. Let's see here. Make a Udemy course with Django and DevOps. So Lambda, Jenkins, serverless, scaling our app, etc. So I actually have serverless courses already, not necessarily on AWS. So I believe you were referring to AWS Lambda when you said Lambda, not like a Python Lambda function, which, you know, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But serverless itself, I actually do cover quite a bit. And I do intend to cover even more because serverless is really cool. Scaling our application. Well, if you're using a serverless managed service, something like Google Cloud Run or AWS Lambda, you don't have to worry about scaling it at all. They handle all of those things. And you can do that with a lot of tools itself to actually deploy to AWS Lambda or to serverless on Google Cloud. So with AWS Lambda, the Zappa framework, so I have a series called Try Zappa, will actually teach you how to pretty much easily bootstrap a application on Lambda. And then for serverless, you're probably going to want to use Docker or other kinds of serverless. Google Cloud Run is a good example of that. Using Docker is, in my opinion, the way to go and the way to scale as well. Yeah, cool. Getting a ton of questions. This is great. So what about built-in Django caching framework? Is it better than using Cache API in Service Worker to cache assets? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. That seems like a really good Stack Overflow question to at least search for, if not post. This is something I would love to know myself because it's a really, really good question. So if you do find the answer, please let me know. Thank you for the question. I want to store some important keys of users. Where can I store them and retrieve them online? Well, you can use Django to actually store that data. And you'd want to do it as insecure of a fashion as possible. This is kind of a vague question, so that's my vague answer for you. How can we create user groups and give permissions to them? Very similarly to how you create users themselves. So I'm assuming you mean user groups in Django. Yeah, it's very similar to that, and then adding permissions on the actual user group itself. I mean, the Django documentation actually covers this pretty well, I think. Thanks for the question. Best place to deploy Django projects, like a platform as a service. Well, this is actually hard to answer because it really depends on what your project's goal is, right? So to me, serverless applications, the best place to deploy serverless applications right now is by using the Docker containers. And the only service that I know of that's managed that uses Docker containers in a serverless environment is Google Cloud Run. I actually believe that AWS has one. The name is eluding me right now, but Google Cloud Run is probably the best one because Google pioneered Kubernetes, and Kubernetes runs Google Cloud Run. To me, I actually use Heroku all the time to deploy a lot of applications really quickly because it's basically just a Git push, much like pushing your code to GitHub, and Heroku runs pretty much everything else. And I haven't had hardly any issues with it. I did notice that DigitalOcean just released their own platform as a service, much like Heroku actually. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually targeting to go head to head with Heroku while supporting developers quite a bit. I've have a number of tutorials on DigitalOcean itself on cfe.sh, but this is not the ones that I covered. This is a whole new service I think they might have just released. So those two are, I think, worth checking out. So the DigitalOcean, I think it's the app platform. I believe that's what they call it. And then Heroku. Heroku's been around a lot longer, so there's probably a lot more documentation and tutorials on how to use it. But if you need a lot more environment control, or if you need to build a lot more DevOps and networking in conjunction with your Django application, then AWS is great, Google Cloud Run is great, or excuse me, Google Cloud Platform is great, Azure, Linode, DigitalOcean. There's a lot of really great options for building things beyond using just a platform as a service. So this is really a tough thing to answer because there's just so many options. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit. Probably not, right? That didn't really help a whole lot. Yeah. Did any of you guys catch the boot camp earlier? I'm actually really curious how many of you jump on this kind of live stream in comparison to the boot camp. I think the nice thing about the boot camp is you're actually learning something, so it probably keeps a good amount of you a little bit more engaged than these live Q&As, because sometimes you get questions that you're not interested in at all, so you sort of tune out a little bit. I know I kind of do, and I'm the one answering the questions, so I can only imagine how some of you feel. Okay, next one. Hi, I started your Django REST framework course on Udemy, but it's kind of hard to understand the concepts. Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't know Django well, especially if you don't know class-based views and models and probably forms and validation, if you don't know those concepts, using the Django REST framework is going to be incredibly hard to do. So maybe learn those things and then go back to learning the Django REST framework. I feel like I do talk about the requirements in that course itself, but that's just a quick reiteration for you. Hey, from Australia, huh? Melbourne? Or you guys pronounce it Melbourne? Melbourne? I cannot pronounce how you pronounce it, but we in the US call it Melbourne. So any suggestions for software/website for product development management? I use Trello free version. So you're referring to like managing a team or managing your progress. This is tricky. Some people use literal post-it notes, right? And just put it on their wall and measure progress that way. Like there's a concept called Scrum, in a Scrum board where you can just put all of the to-do items that you have in one column, all the things you're working on in another column, and then all the things you're finished on in another column, like literally on your wall with Post-its. And then you just pull off a Post-it, stick it under your monitor, work on it, finish, move to the next one. You can use Trello for that for sure. I think Asana is also a really cool way to measure these things. Now, to me, it's really when you actually have a team to do it, right? How I measure these things is I literally open up a notepad and say to do in a whether it's in Markdown or a text file, and I write down just a few to-do items I have for the near future. I finish those things out. Once they're done, then I think about the next to-do items. Because I guess the overarching goal of the project I have in mind. And so those like short-term to-dos come from that overarching goal. So I don't actually use a lot of these software tools to manage like a to-do list, because as some of you might know, when you actually create a software-based to-do list, man, it gets really, really long really fast because you want to write everything that you want to do. So I use, granted, a Markdown or a text file is software, but I just type out a few items on there, finish those things, and then come back. And if it's more of a long-term one in that list, I might put it into like future, like another future column, if you will. But really you got to find what works for you. So I wouldn't stick to one tool. I would just play around with a bunch of different tools and see what you really like. That's my best recommendation. Because my method might be good for me, but it's not necessarily good for everybody. I've definitely seen teams that use Asana, and Asana is really great for a lot of stuff. Oh, I missed some of these. Hey, how's it going? Welcome. Hello, hey, from India, nice. Hi. I know these were like 10 minutes ago. Hello, it's evening in El Salvador. Nice. Let me just refresh some things here because I'm working on this comment thing, you know, I'm trying to make it better, but I still have a bunch of glitches. I haven't had time to improve it much. So thanks for bearing with me on these glitches, especially if I click over your question. You know, I don't intend to do that, but I will say the fastest way, the easiest way to support what I do with these live Q&As and to get your question answered is to do a super chat. It's really easy to do. Even if it's $1, every little helps. Every little bit helps. And anyways, how to integrate Tableau in Django. So you actually wouldn't really use Django to integrate with Tableau. What you would use is the database that Django is integrated to. And actually, hopefully what you do is have a read replica of that database. So let's say, for instance, you have a PostgreSQL database or a MySQL database inside of Django, and your Django project uses all that. Some services provide read replica options. So it's like literally a copy of your database, but it's optimized for reads, which is what Tableau will often do. For those of you who aren't familiar with Tableau, it's a, how do I put this? It's like a dashboard tool. So graphs and charts and also doing some sort of ETL, so extract, transform, and load, but like maybe some calculations. It's really good for data science teams and marketing teams to see how things are going. But more than likely, you're not going to actually be using Django itself. I can't remember if Tableau has API calls or if it can do API calls. If that's the case, then you're going to create some sort of RESTful API endpoint, maybe using the Django REST framework, maybe not. And then you would just make API calls to that with some sort of auth key that you give Tableau user. But I haven't used Tableau enough to really say if that's even an option. But I do know doing a read replica of your database and then just loading in your database into Tableau is absolutely an option. I know that much. So thanks for the question. Appreciate it. Can you do a role-based authentication project in Django? Thank you for the suggestion. This is a really good idea. I do not know when I will get around to this, but I do really appreciate it and like this idea. So a quick way to maybe keep track of this is to go on my website and go to cfe.sh/suggest, or the suggestion link at the very bottom of the page, and actually write this as a full-on suggestion and see if other people in the CFE community want to see that as well. And keep bugging me. I mean, obviously not in this live stream. You don't need to do it that way, but in a few weeks, if you don't hear from me, just comment somewhere. I see a lot of the comments, maybe not all of them. I don't interact with all of them, but keep letting me know. That's a good way to do it. Cool. Let's see what my last poll was. Hey, there we go. This is a good one for you guys. Only 40 votes so far. So to actually vote, you can just do #H or #G in the live chat. And this will tell me whether or not you have subscribed. Because I'm like really curious as to how you guys show up on a live stream if you're not subscribed. Like if you don't know who I am, like why are you hanging out on this live stream? I mean, I'm flattered for sure, but if you do know who I am and you've watched some of my content and you're still on this live stream, why aren't you subscribed? I don't know. I get it. I get it. Yes, Dave is back. Hang on one second, you guys. Coffee. It's been a while. Dave, it's been a while for me too. I haven't done a live stream for a few days. So thank you for the coffee. I appreciate it. Always love seeing that from you. You should put your profile picture on, Dave. I don't know what you look like. You know? Or not, whatever. You could put a picture of I don't know, Ned Stark or something, or The Witcher. You guys watch those shows? Anyways, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Love it. Can you explain the difference between model admin URLs, I'm assuming you meant, and views.py? Yeah, so the Django admin, this is built in to Django, right? You don't actually have to use it, but if you want to have a quick way to manage the data that Django manages that's in your database, you can add it to the Django admin. So if you've ever used something like PHP MyAdmin, I haven't used it in a really long time, so I don't really remember what it looks like. But it's just a really quick way to manage some of the data that's in your database with Django. Now, URLs and views, when you actually do your own custom URLs and views, you get to choose what's in that data. I mean, you do get to choose what's in the admin as well, but spending too much time in the admin, I don't think is advisable unless your client, like the person you're hired to help or the team you're hired to help, really needs a lot of sophisticated back office tools. The admin can provide a lot of those tools without putting in a whole lot of work. So there's definitely value to adding customization to the admin. But if you're getting really lost, why spend time trying to reinvent the wheel or trying to modify something that probably shouldn't be modified? You can always just throw it into a view and do that. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I know Vault can store keys in a safe and secure manner. Scenario. I got it. Yeah, so you're still asking me how to store stuff, I guess. Thanks for that. How can we create user groups and giving custom pages to them and restricting permissions? You might be friends with the guy who talking about role-based authentication. So creating user groups in Django is actually really easy to do. Adding restrictions to those groups is also easy. Like I think maybe the easiest way for vast majority of people to do this is to build their own model, right? So build a model with a foreign key of many-to-many to any particular users, and then another model with maybe permissions of what you want them to do. So try and do it without using the built-in Django features. And then after you do that, hopefully you'll have a better sense of how the Django features work. Because the groups and permissions in Django, I think they're actually pretty clear in the documentation, but maybe that's because I've been using it so much. And perhaps this would be a really good tutorial that I should probably end up doing, because kind of giving the advice for something this kind of specific, it's like kind of hard to give advice without actually starting to code, which is something I'm not going to do right now. But thank you for that. It gives me a lot to think about. Appreciate it. All right. Next one. Fasal Zone. Welcome. Thank you so much. A bagel with that coffee. Nice. Coffees and bagels. That is probably going to be my breakfast this weekend. Well, definitely the coffee part. Bagels. I don't have bagels as much as I'd like to, but thank you very much. It's weird. Like once you turn 30, eating a lot of things is like you get sluggish, and it adds, this lower part that didn't used to exist but now does. But thank you for the bagel. I appreciate it. Cool. Let's see here. Next one. How do I build a REST API with Django? Do I need to know the Django REST framework for that? No. You can actually build a full-on REST API with pure Django. You don't need any add-ons for it. That being said, the Django REST framework makes it incredibly easy to build a RESTful API on top of Django. maybe at some point Django will build more native support for building the Django REST framework type things. The one of the biggest like advantages of using the Django REST framework is their serialization. So their serializers, or serializers.py typically, make it really easy to convert a model or a query set into JSON data. They make it incredibly easy to convert it that way, but they also make it incredibly easy to validate data from the other end, right? If data is coming in. Django doesn't have something like that built in per se. You can use Django forms to actually validate incoming JSON data. Absolutely. But Django REST Framework and the serializers do all that work for you, and they make it really, really easy to do. So that answers the question. Thank you. All right. What package is used for using Django with MongoDB, or MongoDB with Django? It's actually called Django. So get rid of the A in Django and add an O. No surprise, it's Django and Mongo mixed together. So Django. I actually just wrote a blog post on this maybe a month ago, a couple weeks ago, on how to do that. So if you go to cfe.sh, there's a blog post exactly how to integrate those two things. Django doesn't support MongoDB by default. Django is much better with SQL databases or relational databases, essentially. NoSQL databases like MongoDB, Django doesn't have native support for, but Django makes that incredibly easy. Next question. What is Boto 3? Boto 3 are Python bindings for Amazon Web Services. So AWS's APIs and all that. Boto 3 is a way to interact with all of those things. It's kind of weird. I'm not actually sure why they call it Boto 0 or Boto 1 and Boto 3. So there's Boto and Boto 3, and there's also another one, Boto Core. All of those should work with AWS. And it's stable. That's, I think, maybe the biggest one. Maybe somebody else built it and then Amazon just integrated it into their stack. I don't actually know. Okay, I'm gonna pull this poll down. Looks like we still have some people that are not subscribed. I don't know if they're here today because this is definitely a poll from 4. Alphabet. Thank you. I'm glad you like the hat. I think your name and picture is hilarious, given there's no way you represent that company. Does that even need to be said? I don't know. Probably not. How to add a download as a zip feature in my Django website. I want to zip and download a Word docx file. So Python has a built-in zip feature itself. And then what you need to do is essentially open your file with a, well, so you're going to actually import response from Django. So from Django to HTTP import response. And then you're going to create an instance of that response. You're going to add a header that does application/force download, I think it is, or inline attachment. Going blank on what the actual header is for content type and content disposition. And then you can just do it that way. That's one way that Django can manage doing that from a view and a specific Django URL. I definitely cover that downloading in, I think, Serve Up 2. And if it's not there, it's definitely it should be in dive into AWS, where it's more production grade downloading than just Django related downloading. So yeah. Hopefully that answers your questions. Any help for interview question regarding Django framework? Wow, there's a lot of things that this could be. I'm trying to think of something good for you. I really don't have anything off the top of my head of what it is that I think would be critical. You know, like, is it a whiteboard interview? If it is, can you recreate class-based views from scratch? That'd be an interesting thing. Unit tests. You write unit tests. I think that's probably a common interview question. And how do you actually write those unit tests? And can you make a query more efficient? So any query more efficient. Query set queries, especially, and how managers and query sets work, or custom query sets work. I think those would probably be decent questions. Good suggestion, or good question. I probably need to talk to more hiring managers and get these sort of things, right? So like more of these interview type questions, or even have some of them on maybe some sort of interview or podcast myself, because this is a pretty common question of like, what are interview tips? And I'm probably not the best person to ask these things, right? I've hired a handful of Django developers, and I've been hired a handful of times, but not nearly as much as like somebody who's hired hundreds or thousands of Django developers over the years, or any developers over the years. Those ones would be much more honed into what would be really good interview questions. I'm just more coming up with what I think would be a good thing for you to know. Anyways, thanks for the question. Here's a good one. So do I recommend starting with commercial software like Squarespace to launch a business, then move to Django when you hire a team, etc.? It depends on what your core competency is or should be, right? So if you're selling hats, and literally just hats, I recommend that you use Shopify over Squarespace. Shopify is much larger, and I think poses a pretty large threat to Amazon.com, because they're really on the side of a lot of these small businesses. There's thousands and thousands of small businesses that use Shopify. And so if you're selling physical goods, then it makes sense to use Shopify. The other reason to use Shopify, if you ever intend to move into Django, is Shopify has a templating engine called Liquid, which is very similar to Django's templating engine, and also similar to Jinja, I think it's called. I always say it wrong. But the Flask templating engine, essentially, which you can also use in Django too. But that templating engine is very similar on Shopify. But whenever you're starting any project, you should pick the tool that helps build momentum as soon as possible, whatever that tool is. So for me, I can build things really quickly in Django. So oftentimes I jump to Django, but not every time. Sometimes I'll use something like FastAPI or Flask or Express.js. It really depends on the project itself for my backend. Other times I'll use WordPress or Shopify. It really just depends on what the project is itself. So especially when it comes to a business, you want to just get it out there going as quickly as possible, get some traction, and then you can start asking these questions better, right? So you shouldn't be spending too much time about whether or not you should use commercial software to develop it yourself if you're actually in a hurry to start this business. Now, for me, what happened is I knew that an early project, before I really knew how to code, this early project that I had needed software. So it needed a way to like sift through a database, right? If you need stuff like that, where for sure it's custom, then you can't just use a commercial software. And if anything, you would probably be doing a disservice using a prepackaged software out of the gates. So you could potentially use something like a no-code tool, or you could spend the time and actually learn how to build software and run all that. Realistically, I think there's a number of people that come on this channel that are, there's a lot of beginners for sure, but there's also some that are more advanced developers, and you might be able to actually find somebody to help you navigate this problem as well. So thanks for the question. I kind of want to talk more about business related things, and specifically entrepreneurial things, because it's been fascinating to me for a really long time. But it's just something where, like, with software, I think this is my hang up about things that aren't the hard sciences. So like engineering, math, computer science, teaching that or talking about it, you have tangible results almost immediately, right? So you'll know a very basic example, 1 plus 10 is 11. There's no doubt about that, right? But whether or not this is a cool hat, a little ambiguous. I say it is, but you might not think so. And does that mean it's not then? Well, who knows? But for sure, 1 plus 10 is 11. So talking about business or talking about things that are a little bit more abstract like that, I've always had a hard time really getting going because it's abstract. It's like what worked for me is not going to work for you, right? It's just not. You can learn from my story, but like a better way to think about this is what worked for Mark Zuckerberg or what worked for Elon Musk is not going to work for us because they made that foundation. Facebook exists. To try and make another Facebook is going to be incredibly hard. To try and make another PayPal, to try and make another Tesla. Like all of these things are going to be incredibly hard, but it's definitely not what they faced, right? It's completely different. So even their advice is usually feels like a platitude. It feels like just somewhat empty, right? So like I heard Elon Musk talk when I was teaching at USC. I heard him talk to the graduating class, and he said you just got to work really, really hard. And I talked to a few students after, and they were just like, "Man, that was kind of a letdown of a talk." Well, obviously we need to work hard. What are you saying, Elon? But it's really stuck with me. It's absolutely true. So those are the kind of things he can say, not like, oh, you got to get lucky and be in the finance industry and change how online e-commerce happens and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's really hard to do all those things. Anyways, definitely got off on a tangent there. So let's answer a few more questions. Already answered this one. Let's see here. Can a 2-core virtual private server handle an app with all of its dependencies that include the database? Well, it depends on how much memory it has. That's going to be a factor. So if it has enough memory, it probably can handle it. I don't know. That might not be enough resources. But don't take my word for it. Test it out yourself, right? Do it out. Do the tests. Run load tests. Use like Python requests or AIO HTTP and just send a ton of requests like a DDoS attack almost with your own machine and see if your app can handle it and how well it handles it. That's one way to do it. How to send notifications in Django. You can use Django channels for this. Django channels is a WebSocket service that you can use for asynchronous things. You can also use Django and Celery. So Python's package called Celery. That's another way to do it. I will say that I'm not going to be on here a whole lot longer, maybe 15 minutes. I literally say this every time after half an hour has gone by, and then 30 minutes later, I'm still there. So we'll see. Bootcamp is awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Glad you're enjoying it. There's another one tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's GMT -7. I was corrected on that one recently. Let's see. Do you have a series for the Django REST framework after this bootcamp? That is probably a good idea. I have a lot of things that I want to cover, so it's really hard to commit to anything at this point. Perhaps if I got a major sponsor for some of these things, then I would shift a little bit of focus towards some sort of like nice balance between what students want and what the sponsor wants. So in the case of Django REST framework, I would love it if there was a sponsor out there that really wanted to help put this together again, because I do already have Django REST framework stuff. That's the other thing is, I know it's a really important subject. That's why I already have a lot on it, right? But actually making a boot camp for the Django REST framework, which has definitely been asked before, why I'm spending so much time on it, is a good idea. But I have a lot of stuff already. So I have a course called REST API. That course covers the Django REST framework pretty in depth, I'd say. So Django versus Fast API. Django is like a batteries included like web framework. Fast API is not. That's really what it really falls down to. So to get Fast API to have all the features of Django, you have to add in a bunch of third party packages. which is nothing wrong to that. It really depends on the project. That's a really quick summary of that comparison, you know? Ah, you were there to answer others' questions. I'm assuming you meant the boot camp. That's awesome. Thank you for doing that. That is a really good way to learn as well, because you'll get these questions. We're like, how do you do that? But it also helps people that join, and good on you for doing that. Thank you. Yeah, cool. Cool. I probably answered something like half an hour ago for you. Okay, let's see here. Now, if you ask the same question over and over again, probably not going to answer it. I'm sorry. Like spamming. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone. Okay, this is a good one. Energy code. I think we've talked before, right? Am I working on any personal projects all the time? There's like never a time that I'm not doing that. So Tight.ai is one of them. So Tight.ai right now. Right now it's an image dataset tool. So if you're interested in getting into machine learning, which I think everyone should be, Tight.ai is a very simple tool. Name your price. You can get it for free if you want. I'm doing that because I want to be an AI. Like, my future of software development in general is 100% AI. Like, that doesn't mean I won't keep doing Django and teaching and stuff like that soon. It just means that I'm doing everything in my power to get really, really good at machine learning and AI. It takes a little bit of time because I have a full life, right? I have a lot of work, regular work that's outside of the context of doing my own studies and research and all that. I also have a family, which I much prefer spending time to almost anything. Actually, definitely to anything. I'd rather spend time with my family. But of course, we got to work. We got to be able to pay the bills. We got to do all those things. So this is usually the time of day. Usually when my kids go to sleep, I can either do stuff like this or prepare for like tomorrow's boot camp. I should probably make some slides for it and prepare a little bit more to tomorrow, which I will do in just a little bit. But then it's also a good time for me to study and learn things. So I also consider those personal projects, right? So studying and learning is also something that I spend a lot of time doing. So the answer is, do you freelance? No, but I would say that probably everybody has a dollar amount that they would say yes to freelancing on, right? There's some amount out there that you would have to say yes to. I even think like probably even Bill Gates, well, maybe not quite Bill Gates, but maybe Bill Gates, right? Like if the US government offered him $100 billion for the next 10 years to do some freelancing for them on whatever it is, he's got to say yes, right? Like he's got to. Like, I mean, obviously he could say no, but and maybe he would because maybe he doesn't care about those things anymore. But no, I don't actually freelance. But there is a dollar amount that I probably would do some freelancing here and there. But I think that I have so many personal projects myself, so many things that I want to accomplish, and already a really full schedule with Coding for Entrepreneurs and everything I do. It's really hard to like say yes to pretty much any freelancing job, and that's actually really expensive ones too, right? So like, you know, some web developers can get projects that are like 3 or 4 months for 50 to 100K US dollars, and those things don't interest me at this point, right? I mean, maybe if it's a really, really cool project and it's something to do with AI and machine learning, and I can actually grow a lot as a developer and as a machine learning and data science person, then maybe it would be a really cool thing that I would check out, and maybe for a lot less than that. But I haven't seen much of those things, and frankly, I'm not looking. So thank you for the question, Energy Code. It was a long answer, probably too long. Probably a simple no could have sufficed, but if you know me, I like to give you a bunch of context. Here's a good one. What did I use for making my website? So for Coding for Entrepreneurs or Tight.ai or what? I'm going to assume Coding for Entrepreneurs. So that is
Django and React.js, among many other things. So I have many other services that help run that in addition to just the software platform, because there's API services that are in there as well. But the core of it is Django and React.js. So yeah. Thanks for the question. Next one. Django Stin. I haven't seen that one yet. For sponsor, Chris Titus Tech can help. I am not familiar with what you mean by Chris Titus Tech. Do you mean he gives advice to doing it? Or you're saying what? Interesting. He's got quite a blog here, huh? But thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. Yeah. And also for the recommendation. I'll have to check out Chris Titus Tech a little bit more. Let's see here. Here we go. I don't know. Is it only me, or do others feel you don't feel satisfied with what you learn in a day, and you end up with an exhausted brain and sometimes stress? Oh shit! I have to learn this. Please advise how to handle this situation. I think this like mindset of oh shit, I have to learn this. I don't know if I think it should be more like oh yes, I get to learn this. That mindset is not always easy to have if you're doing something that you maybe shouldn't be doing, right? Probably counter advice to a lot of you who think that you want to be in software. But the things that I find challenging in software are like, I do it because it's challenging, not because it's like there's some sort of reward down the line, right? So I will say I do come up against walls that are like, oh shit, how do I fix this or how do I solve this? For me, most of the time, it's taking a break, separating out from it, you know, hanging out with my family, playing with my kids, going for a walk, going for a drive, relaxing, watching TV, The Boys, Witcher, Game of Thrones, you know, so all the cool ones. So stepping away is actually really important to relax when something is really challenging. And if you're like, all right, look, maybe I'm misinterpreting how you're saying that, but if something's really important to you, you will find a way. And for me, it took a lot longer than I wanted it to, right? So many things take a lot longer than I want them to. But I know when I was like, when I decided I was going to learn how to code, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I really want to know now. I want to be able to build the things that I can do today. I wanted that like 10 years ago, right? And then finally, when it happened, I had a new goal, a new challenge to reach. And so that satisfaction definitely is felt now, right? Like I feel very grateful that I'm at where I'm at. But I went through this long period of time that I had to work hard to get where I'm at. But I always had this goal of like, I really wanted to have these skills. So to me, the skills were more important than the challenge in the short run. And that was software in my case. There's many other people that's not software, and that's okay. We need a diverse group of people doing all sorts of things. So I'm certainly not telling you to quit because it's hard. But what I'm telling you is if your heart isn't in it, it's always going to be hard. No matter how much you learn, if your heart's not in it, it's always going to be hard. Thanks for the question. And here we go. 20 minutes later. No, it's probably about 10, isn't it? It's not quite 20. Cool. Are you guys like friends? How do I sometimes maybe just piggybacking on each other's questions? That's probably more likely, but sometimes I get these questions where they're like, continuations or very similar questions. It's almost like you guys are hanging out together and saying the same thing, but I suppose we're all in the same live chat, so perhaps that's why. It's also like kind of weird to me to be doing live chat things because I was around when AOL message boards and stuff were out, and then all the controversy around a lot of those message boards, like, oh, you gotta stay off them and all that. So it's like it's kind of weird that now it's like very, very common to be in message boards and get a lot out of it. Alphabet, is Django still slow? So there is some argument that Python itself is slow in comparison to like C# or C++ or C. In that sense, it is slow in comparison to those things. But is it slow in how, like, can it handle scale for a web application? Absolutely. Instagram is the shining example. Pinterest is another shining example that have scaled using Django successfully too. It wasn't just Django. They had a lot of other services that helped them be able to scale. But as far as I know, their core web application was Django. So hopefully that answers your question. Cool. Okay, so maybe a couple more questions. I got a few things I got to do, and then I got to go to bed. You know what I mean? So here we go. This is a good one. Absolutely function-based views if you're a beginner. Absolutely, without a doubt. So class-based views or function-based views. Class-based views shortcut what you do in function-based views. So if you don't understand function-based views, you're probably not going to be able to understand class-based views. And then out, yeah, Django. I get it. Some Django developers would be like, well, no, there's a base view class that you can handle all of the request type methods, and it's not really a shortcut to the function-based view. I get that. I understand that. But the vast majority of class-based views that people use are the generic views, the ones that kind of do all the work for you. So in my opinion, you need to know how that work is done, and function-based views are a really good way to start, and then moving over to class-based views. So that's what I'm doing in the Django Bootcamp right now, is we're going to be doing a lot of function-based view stuff. I'm not quite sure yet if we're going to touch on class-based views. I honestly don't know if we'll have enough time. I'm going to assume that we probably won't touch on class-based views, but I definitely covered on my website in a series called Class-Based Views Unleashed. So thanks for the question. Right. Why is it hard to set up Python and Django? What are you struggling with? I actually don't think it is incredibly hard anymore. You download and install Python with a executable from python.org, much like I did in my setup guide. And then with that Python executable, you can just run python-m venv, so virtual environment, create that virtual environment, and then install Django. Perhaps there could be a easier, more user-friendly experience for that. And at some point, I would imagine, you know, well, I don't know. I just don't actually think that that's that hard of a thing to do. Maybe that's just me. Okay, so a real quick way for me to not answer your questions is to ask them 1,000 times. I'm going to say that probably every time I catch it on the live stream. I really want to make these comments that they bundle up on their own, right? So they just bundle up. So I don't care if you ask that same question 1,000 times or not. I realize it's probably annoying to everybody else, but that is a very quick way to not get it. Okay, so what is my criteria to accept an offer to be a tech co-founder? What other person traits what should the other person's trait be? This would be a tough one, to be honest with you, to give a blanket answer for this. To me, it has so much to do with what the project and the idea is, probably first, to pique my interest. And then I would want to make sure that the other person can hold up their end of the bargain, right? So I, as a technical co-founder now, would be incredibly expensive for that person. So they would have to consider that. And when I say expensive, I mean probably expensive for any startup. So probably outside the realms of what startups would probably do. Unless, of course, I really, really believed in the idea and I'm willing to do sweat equity at this phase in life with the idea that's almost the best idea, or the idea that's just like flooring. I just don't know if I could actually put in a lot of work doing the technical side of things. Now, if it's just to manage it, I don't know either. The other, so let's move a step back and speak of this a little bit more broadly. So if you want to be a tech co-founder, what should you be looking for in the other person? Well, hopefully, again, the idea is important, and ideally speaking, they have some sort of industry experience themselves in that idea, or you have another founder in there that does. And so the two of you or the three of you would actually complement each other's skills, right? So one of the things you probably don't want to have if you're a co-founder, if you're starting a business, you probably don't really want to be managed by some business person that like I would not be able to thrive at all if I joined a team where the boss acted like the boss. Like if I'm the technical person and that's the reason I'm there is to provide my technical expertise, but then the boss lays the hammer down and says, "Nah, we can't do it that way. I don't trust your intuition." Well, there's like almost no basis for that. Then that would be a really hard thing to join, and something that you would want to spend a lot of time figuring out. So when you're starting a business, it might not work out for 5 or 10 years. Right? It might take that long. So that's the other thing, is you need to be able to actually stand who this person is. Now, marketers and business people get super hyped up. So they really think that it's just around the corner that you're going to hit scale and start making a ton of money. Because that's actually what you hear most about, right? So like in the news and the tech, you hear that so-and-so started this business a month ago and now they're doing $10 million in revenue. That certainly happens from time to time, but you never hear about the ones that, wow, we were doing this business for 10 years, it did not work, and the business fell apart. That happens. It really does. But nobody talks about it, because who wants to talk about a 10-year failure or a 10-year project that went awry? That probably doesn't even answer your question, honestly. I don't know. Haha. Which is better, Express or Django? It's not a fair comparison. Django has a lot of batteries built in. Express does not. So it's very similar to saying what's better, Django or Flask. And pretty much with every web framework, it really depends on the project. I used to always hands down say Django. That's because I didn't know enough to give the right answer. Right? So if you've ever heard me say, oh yeah, Django's the best web framework there is, it's just wrong. Django's the best for me for a lot of things, and it's probably the best for a lot of you for a lot of things, but it's definitely not the best for every project every single time. Can I post a session for speech emotion recognition? Hey, that's a good idea. That's not something I'm going to be covering anytime soon. But Valerio, I think is his name. He has a channel, the AI of Sound. He might be somebody that you would want to check out. You know what I mean? Yeah. What is the difference between Node.js and React.js? So Node.js is a runtime for JavaScript. So Node.js and React.js can actually work together. Now, if you're talking about using Node.js as a backend, then you'd be using something like Express.js running from Node.js. And then React.js can be the front end for that. So React.js is a client-side library, so the front end for building user interfaces. Node.js is the runtime that potentially could be a backend, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For example, there's a command called create React app. You have to have Node.js installed to use that. I think maybe you could do it another way. I don't know why you would, but you have to have Node installed on your local machine. There's also something called npm, the Node Package Manager. You have to use that a lot when you're using any sort of JavaScript library these days. You didn't used to always have to use it, but now you pretty much always have to. And Node.js runs all of that. So Node.js is like much bigger than React.js in scope, and the potential that Node.js can do is probably much higher than React.js. Much like Python's potential is much higher than Django's. Not that you asked that question or anything, but that's for everybody else. You know what I mean? Okay, guys. Maybe a couple more questions. And what do you know? I'm here an hour. 30 minutes ago, I said I was going to be here for 15 minutes. Every time. You guys get me with these good questions. I could probably sit here and answer questions for like 3 hours, maybe even longer than that. Because surprisingly, there was a lot of questions today that I haven't actually answered in a long time. So, you know, most of the time I'm getting questions that I've already answered, and it's more or less frustrating because some of them are not great questions, maybe. So I'll just do some real quick ones. How to use Django REST Framework and Node.js in the same project. You would have two different processes working with each other. Or you would put it into, well, I mean, you would be doing this anyway, but essentially you would put it into either Kubernetes or a virtual private server or VPC or virtual private cloud, and have them communicating with each other through their various APIs. That's probably the best way I can put that. But it's certainly not going to run on the same runtime, right? It would definitely be a different process altogether, most likely. So really, it'd be almost like they're two different projects. They just communicate a lot with each other with their various APIs, whether it's a REST API or not. So yeah, thanks for the question. What software are you using for going live? OBS Studio and YouTube, naturally. So OBS Studio is the actual broadcast software that I'm using. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, for the live questions that show up on screen, that's something I'm working on my side, or as a side project on my side, not on my side, on a side project. Okay, so this will probably be the last couple of questions from MD. You are the last one to ask a question, so there we go. Okay, so I've done some Python and Django projects, like To Do app with Django and Django API with React. What should you do now? 1, Django, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or 2, Django, React, 3, MERN. So make a more full-featured Django project. So build an e-commerce application, build a social network, build something you're really interested in doing, and see if your skills with the projects you've done are enough. And if they're not enough, write down every single question you have while you're building it. Sometimes writing the question actually solves it for you. Your next question was, as a junior web developer, what are the project gigs I should create for freelancing? Solve a bunch of problems that you have, and then try and find businesses you find interesting and solve problems that you assume they have. Not to land them as a client or anything, but just something that you would find interesting. So a good example of this is actually this tool that I have. Okay, so let me just pull up another question. Okay, so this tool right here. All right, so I think this is a project that's worth building myself, right? So I learned a lot about the YouTube API to make this part work. It's actually not that hard to do, but I got it done, right? Now, I think this is actually a good project for, let's say, for instance, Tesla. If you watched Tesla's Battery Day, they had live Q&A. What do you know? And literally during the presentation, they're scrolling through a bunch of questions, right? Similar to like what you could do right now with this live chat. You could just scroll back and do that. And you hear Elon a couple times going like, we already answered that question. We already answered that one. So perhaps this is a good prototype that I could send to them, or good enough prototype that I could send to them and say, hey, you should absolutely use this on your next live stream because, well, it solves the problem that you had during your last live stream. Now, I have no idea. It probably is not ready to scale to the sheer amount of questions that Tesla likely gets, right? So, like, I'm getting how many questions today? Like 100, maybe 200. That's not even close to the amount of questions that Tesla has. But it's a good example of a project that's a portfolio thing that I could put on my GitHub and say, hey, I made this to sort of solve that issue. There's still things that I need to solve with scaling, but that's one of those ideas. And then that way you would be able to actually handle what it is that those people, like potential freelance customers or clients would actually potentially ask. So hopefully that answers your question, MD. I hope that it happens. Bruno, great streams these last days. Thank you so much. You're hooked on to my live stream. You don't remember how you discovered my channel. I don't remember either, Bruno, but thank you for coming out and checking out this channel. What is the best resource to learn creating APIs using vanilla Python and not the Django REST framework? I'm assuming you mean vanilla Django, not the Django REST framework, because the vanilla Python, you got a long road ahead for building something from scratch with vanilla Python. You can do it, and I actually have in my 30 days of Python, I show you how to create a web framework without, or excuse me, a web application without a framework. It's one of those days. I don't remember which one it was, but maybe like 26 or 27. So from that, you can learn how to actually build a vanilla Python web framework. And then to create a REST API, you really just need to convert, or you need to learn what a REST API is, which is essentially just a bunch of endpoints that your project can handle that can communicate back to another project or another web application instead of a person. So you're not rendering out a HTML page, you're rendering out JSON data most likely. Hopefully that helps your question. Okay. Phase Rockstar, superb. I'm doing a great job. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Hopefully you guys are getting something out of this. Please do a live project on YouTube clone with Django. Have you seen the Django Bootcamp yet? That is a live one, and we are building a project. It's a single page e-commerce project, but nonetheless, that is going to be every day, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Yes. And AK Gaming, I did not answer this question. Probably should, though. What do you guys think? I probably should. I pulled it up on accident. MongoDB with Django. So Django is built for SQL databases. It's built for relational databases. MongoDB is a NoSQL or a non-relational database. That's one of the biggest cons. Django is not made for MongoDB, and therefore the benefits aren't really there. Like, it's kind of hard to say, oh, you should definitely use Django with MongoDB. You definitely can with something called Django, but there's a lot of built-in batteries or features that Django has that are lost in Django. Not everything, but a number of things. So thanks for that question. Let me just pull it off real quick. And I did see this good next good question. I'll answer my favorite AI ML book. Oh, that's not it. Right now. This is by far my favorite one. It's called Grokking Deep Learning by Andrew Trask. I highly recommend that you get it. I haven't spent enough time with Jeremy Howard's AI book, but I've heard good things, and I know his old course on YouTube was really good. But they've changed the Fast AI library quite a bit, so I can't say. I just don't know enough yet with this book. I wanted to spend more time with it, but I got caught up with all these live streaming because it's so much fun. But anyways, guys, thanks so much for watching. I really enjoy answering a bunch of questions, and this is definitely going to mean that I'm going to have to prep for the live boot camp tomorrow morning instead of tonight. I'm just not really feeling super productive any longer. Yeah, I don't think I am. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, guys. I will see you next time.